All right, let's dive into Gone with the Wind. It's one of those books you just can't ignore, right? And it's clear you guys are interested in it because it's been captivating readers for generations.
Yeah, for sure. It makes sense that we're still talking about it.
For sure. But, like, there's a reason people still debate it so fiercely, even today.
Right, right.
And we're going to try to unpack all of that today. We've got some really interesting insights from a podcast called Page Turners.
Hmm.
The hosts, Max and Riley, they really get into the heart of the book and the film adaptation.
Oh, cool.
So think of this as our deep dive into what makes this book so, well, captivating and controversial.
Yeah, it really is amazing how this one novel can just like spark so many different reactions. And I mean, to me, that just proves how powerful it is. But it also like reminds us that we can't just passively absorb art,
Yeah.
especially when it deals with sensitive historical periods like, the Civil War and Reconstruction.
You're so right. It's not just a light read at all. And speaking of sparking reactions, I gotta admit, Scarlett O'Hara, I'm fascinated by her. She can be absolutely parable, but her resilience is just, it's awe-inspiring. I mean, this is a woman who will stop at nothing to protect Tara, her family's plantation. And it just, makes you wonder if those choices make her more human or just more flawed.
Yeah, I think that complexity is exactly what keeps readers coming back to her, even if they don't always agree with, like, her actions.
Right.
And it almost makes me think, like, there are parallels to really ambitious figures we see today, just driven by their goals no matter the cost. Have you ever thought about who Scarlett might remind you of in the real world? It's an interesting thought, like seeing those echoes of ambition and drive across time.
It is. That's such a good question to consider. Now, we can't talk about Scarlett without bringing up Brett Butler. I mean, right, their relationship is like the core of the story, and it's just such a tumultuous ride. Honestly, sometimes I just want to shake her for some of the choices she makes, especially when it comes to Rhett. It's like she can't see what's right in front of her.
I think a lot of readers feel that same frustration.
Hmm.
Max and Riley, the podcast hosts, they definitely picked up on that too. But when we look at Rhett, his cynicism and realism, I think, makes him a really captivating character. He sees through like the romanticized version of the South that Scarlett clings to. And that's something that might actually make him resonate more with modern audiences
Interesting.
in a way that Scarlett doesn't.
Okay.
Like there's certain disillusionment that feels very current, a sort of skepticism towards narratives that try to sugarcoat reality.
That's a fascinating observation, how his cynicism is like a counterpoint to the novel's tendency to idealize the past. Which brings us to one of the most crucial aspects of the book, how it portrays the South. Especially during the Civil War and Reconstruction, Max and Riley really went deep on how the book romanticizes the antebellum South. And it raises some serious questions about how slavery is depicted.
Yeah, they definitely highlight the dangers of that romanticized view. Like Mitchell's portrayal of slavery really minimizes the horrors of it, focusing on like this skewed image of loyalty and contentment among the enslaved people. And well, we know that that's not even close to the lived experiences of, those who suffered.
Right.
Gone with the Wind basically perpetuates this myth, this harmful myth, by just completely ignoring the reality of Black experiences during that time.
It's like it tries to make you nostalgic for a time that was a nightmare for so many, and that's where the historical inaccuracies become even more troubling. It's not just storytelling anymore. It's about responsibly representing history and the people who lived through it.
Exactly. The novel doesn't offer, like, any meaningful glimpse into the lives of Black people during this period. And that absence of diverse perspectives speaks volumes, and it makes it hard to fully accept the narrative.
It really makes you think differently about that whole lost cause thing, especially when you think about what was truly lost and for whom. And even though the 1939 film adaptation came out decades after the book, it's not exempt from these critiques.
Yeah,
I mean, it might be a cinematic icon, but it carries that same baggage about the South.
absolutely. While there might be some differences from the book, the movie doesn't really challenge the problematic portrayal of the South. And then there's the complex situation with Hattie McDaniel winning an Oscar for her role as Mammy. It was a landmark achievement, definitely. But the role itself, it's full of these harmful stereotypes. It's hard to reconcile celebrating this historic moment for a Black actress while also, like, acknowledging how limited the role was.
It does raise a lot of questions. What did Max and Riley say about that moment in Hollywood?
And they made a really good point about the limited roles for Black actors back then. So McDaniel's win was a big step forward. But it also shows the lack of, diverse and nuanced representation, like in Hollywood back then.
Yeah.
It kind of reflects a bigger problem, like societal, limited opportunities, ingrained prejudices, that kind of thing. And sadly, this struggle for real representation didn't just end there.
Right. It's a reminder that progress isn't always a straight line. Like there are these triumphs and setbacks along the way, and it makes us look at how far we've come and how far we still have to go. It makes me wonder though, how much responsibility do creators and artists have? Can we expect them to be ahead of their time? Or is it more about us as the audience and how we engage with these complex issues?
That's a really great question, and it gets to the heart of the issue. It's not just about what the creator intended, it's also about how their work is received and interpreted, and how it shapes our understanding of the world. I mean, with Gone with the Wind, even with its flaws, people still love the story. It's part of our culture. And that staying power, we need to really think about that.
Yeah. So it's not just about one book or movie anymore. We're talking about storytelling and how it keeps certain ideas going, whether they meant to or not. Max and Riley said that nostalgia can cloud our judgment, we might have fond memories of a book or film from childhood, but that doesn't mean it's perfect. And I think that's true for all art, really. It makes you wonder how nostalgia is affecting our own enjoyment of things. Have you ever re-examined something you loved and seen it differently, through the lens of growth and understanding?
Oh, absolutely. That's what makes revisiting classics so interesting. It's like having a conversation with your past self. And with the culture of a different time. I mean, Gone with the Wind, it's such a paradox. Captivating story, characters feel real, but it's flawed in how it portrays history. So how do we make sense of that? Is it even possible?
It's a question that goes way beyond this one book. It's about how we engage with art as a whole. Do we have to reject things that have problematic elements? Or is there a way to appreciate the art while acknowledging the flaws?
It's complicated, no easy answers. We have to look at our own biases and how they affect our views. Maybe it's not about erasing or condemning things from the past. Maybe it's more about engaging with them critically. Can we hold these contradictory ideas in our minds, appreciate the art, but also see the harm?
So, finding that balance between appreciation and awareness, it takes some real critical thinking going beyond just enjoying the story. Do you think modern audiences are, more aware of this?
I think there's a growing awareness, yeah. A willingness to have these tough conversations about art and its impact. We're more conscious of the need for diverse voices and accurate representation. That's a good thing, It doesn't, like, ruin the art. It adds a new layer of meaning and understanding.
We're reading with a more critical eye, thinking about the context, the author's background, and seeing the limitations of the time period. We're not just passive anymore, we're active. We're asking those tough questions.
And that's so important, especially with sensitive historical topics. It's about respecting the experiences of those who are marginalized or misrepresented.
Yeah, the historical context of Gone with the Wind is so important to understanding all of this. Max and Riley said that the book was a product of its time. Back then, the lost cause idea was still really popular. And that definitely shaped how Mitchell wrote about the South and slavery.
Right, they really emphasized the need to see it through that historical lens, to see the attitudes and biases that influenced it. It doesn't excuse the harm, but it explains how it happened.
So it's we're adding another layer to reading, right? We're bringing our current understanding of history and social justice to a text that was written almost 100 years ago.
Exactly. We're not just reading the words, we're reading between the lines, seeing what's missing, whose voices aren't there.
We're having a dialogue with the past, trying to understand it through today's lens. And that's where it gets really interesting.
It's a process of, discovery and critical thinking.
Yeah.
And it can be so enriching. It challenges us to face uncomfortable truths, to question our assumptions, to broaden our perspectives.
Because that's what great art can do, even flawed art. It starts those important conversations, challenges our views, makes us face the complexities of the world.
It can be a catalyst for growth, for empathy, for understanding ourselves and society.
And sometimes it's like a mirror, reflecting back our biases, our blind spots, how we've been shaped by the stories we've heard.
That's what makes this deep dive into Gone with the Wind so interesting. It's not just about a book, it's about understanding ourselves and our place in the world.
And seeing that sometimes the most beautiful things can also be the most complicated.
Exactly. The beauty is in that complexity, that tension between what we admire and what we question.
It reminds us that art isn't static. It changes meaning over time, as we do. And that's beautiful.
I agree.
And on that note, we'll be back soon to talk about the lasting legacy of Gone with the Wind and what it means for us today. All right, so we've talked about the characters, the historical context, all the controversies. Gone with the Wind is this mix of captivating storytelling, but also problematic elements. So where do we go from here? What's the takeaway from all this?
Yeah, that's the big question, right? And for me, I think the answer is in that complexity. Like, it's okay to see both the good and the bad, appreciate the artistry, but also acknowledge the harmful stuff. In fact, I think it's really important to do that.
So we're not saying to just toss the book aside or pretend the problems aren't there.
No, not at all. It's about engaging with it, but critically, understanding the history behind it, and using it as a way to start deeper conversations about race, representation, the power of stories, all of that.
I like that. Like we're adding another layer to the story, taking into account everything we know now.
Exactly. We're not just reading passively anymore. We're actively shaping what this book means, its legacy.
And that goes for anything we watch or read, right? We got to think critically about what we're taking in and challenge things when we need to.
Especially with stories about sensitive historical stuff like this. We have to approach it with awareness and respect for the people who actually lived through it.
That makes me think about what you said earlier about nostalgia affecting how we see things. So knowing all the problems with Gone with the Wind, does that change how we feel about it? Can we still enjoy the story knowing what we know? Or does it just hit different now?
Those are tough questions. No easy answers. It's a journey. Personal reflection, critical thinking. But asking those questions, that's the first step. It makes us examine our own connection to the story, the characters, and face any discomfort that comes up.
And maybe those uncomfortable moments are the most valuable ones. They make us think harder, go beyond our gut reactions, really get into the complexity.
Absolutely. Because art isn't just about entertainment, right? It can make us think, make us feel, help us connect with each other, even when it's messy, even when it challenges our views.
Like it's a safe place to explore tough topics,
Yeah.
to work through uncomfortable truths, and maybe come out the other side with a new perspective.
I like that, a safe space. Because even though Gone with the Wind is from a specific time, it's still starting conversations that matter today about race, gender, the legacy of slavery, the South. And those conversations, even the hard ones, are how we grow.
We're saying we shouldn't avoid those tough talks about art. They can actually be really valuable.
Exactly. They push us to look past our own ideas, to see things from other perspectives. That's where real learning happens.
Well said. And on that note, I think it's time to wrap up our deep dive into Gone with the Wind. It's been a fascinating journey, lots of ups and downs. I hope you all got something out of it.
Me too. It's a story that keeps making us think even all these years later.
Yeah.
Hopefully this conversation will encourage you to keep exploring art and its impact. There's always more to find, more to learn, more to talk about.
So keep those conversations going, keep asking questions, and keep diving deep into the stories that matter. We'll be here to help you along the way. Until next time.